The Goat Herder and the Wild Goats, an Aesop Fable. One winter evening, a goat herder was leading his goats back home. A snowstorm had begun, and he knew it would be a cold, nasty night. Getting the goats to safety would be an urgent task. As he quickly led the animals into the barn, the goat herder noticed that 3 wild goats had joined his herd. The wild goats stood out because they were not as attractive as his. He always kept his goats clean and fed them well. The wild goats' coats were tangled and dirty, and their bodies were skinny. The next day, he could not take the goats out to graze in the fields because snow covered the ground. Suddenly, the goat herder had an idea. If he fed the wild goats well and kept them clean, perhaps they would consent to stay with his herd. That would mean that he would have more goat milk and more goat cheese. More milk and cheese meant more money in his pocket. Then he could fix up his house and buy new clothes to replace his old, shabby ones. The very thought made him giggle with pleasure. The extra food and care would not be such a burden if the wild goats provided him with more money.
"Meh, isn't it time to eat?"
he heard the goats asking. When he looked into the feed bin, however, the goat herder saw that he was low on his supply of oats. He looked at his old goat herd. He had cared well for them all their lives. They would follow him and stay loyal and dependable, no matter what, he told himself. That's when he decided to give the wild goats generous portions and feed his own herd tiny portions. One day of less food wouldn't hurt his well-fed goats. After the goat herder fed the animals, he brushed the wild goats' rough, knotted coats. He ignored his own herd, since he had brushed their coats the previous week. After he finished, he could barely tell the difference between his own herd and the 3 wild goats. The next morning, the sun shone bright and warm. All the ice that had been on the ground had thawed, and the snow had melted. The goat herder opened the barn to take the goats to pasture. No sooner did the animals leave the barn than the wild goats began running away. The goat herder's response was immediate. "Wait, stop! Haven't I treated you well? Why don't you stay with my herd? Your lives will be so much better." The biggest goat said, "We decided to leave last night. We feel you don't qualify as a good caretaker." "Why not? Didn't I feed you well?" "Yes, but you didn't feed your own herd in the same way. That kind of neglect would indicate only one thing. You will not feed us well after we stay with you for a while." "But I brushed your coats and cleaned you up so nicely." "We are wild goats, and we do not care for vanity. Being dirty is comfortable for us. Besides, we prefer our freedom." And so the 3 wild goats went their own way, and the goat herder had to be content with his original herd. Moral: never mistreat old friends to gain new ones.